What's up, Yang Gang? You're joining us for another Broke Folk Vote podcast, where we are the poor man's version of the Joe Rogan experience. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, and I don't want to butcher your name. I'm gonna attempt it, and then you tell me if I got it right. It's Zoltan Istvan.
That is correct.
Awesome. And you are the transhumanist candidate, correct?
Well, I mean, I am a transhumanist candidate, but I'm no longer running for the presidency, and I was running under the Republican Party, but I'm formerly the 2016 presidential candidate of the Transhumanist Party.
That is awesome. And for those who don't understand what transhumanism is, explain that. Talk about that for a moment.
Well, transhumanism is using radical science and technology to modify the human being and also to modify the human experience. It can be anything from exoskeleton suits to brain implants to even, simple things like driverless cars. But it's always radical technology applied to the human race.
So for a large section of especially on the conservative side, I know you ran as a Republican, there is the evangelical vote. And transhumanism is something that's a very hard sell to the evangelicals. So talk about how would you speak to those fears?
Well, when it comes to really radical religious people, I try to basically combine transhumanism and religion together and say maybe God wanted us to discover these technologies to improve our life. The problem is a lot of times they think of that radical technology like implants, for example, as mark of the beast and things like that. But if you approach it like a disabled person doesn't have an arm because it was blown off in a war in Afghanistan, but then we give them a robotic arm and that person can now play the guitar or drink a beer, all of a sudden I think the evangelicals start to see that this is really good work. It's good humanitarian work, and then they can get their religion behind it. But it is a tough balance, I'll tell you that for sure.
It is, and I guess a long time ago I would have identified myself as a Christian, which I no longer do, because I believe in the pursuit of all things spiritual as opposed to just one thing. And I've seen that side talk out of both sides of their mouth. And it's a very interesting point that you bring up, because they think automatically mark of the beast. But when you're talking about basic human, things that we all take for granted every day, like the use of our arms and being able to pick up that, that coffee cup like you just did, I think it becomes a lot easier to rationalize it. But there's always going to be this section who think that we're going to start getting these implants and we're going to start doing all these things, and eventually we're just going to be this hive mind.
Well, I mean, I think first off, the evangelical base is so large that they may accept the technology but decide that they don't want to take it to the hive mind stage. Or even if they did, they may, develop such great privacy technologies that they won't even have to worry about it. It's like you can join the hive mind and then leave it or whatever. I mean, in a way already we've been really good about utilizing a lot of the new privacy software so that we can, not feel too weirded out just by carrying around a cell phone. So I think we'll develop these things as we go along. But I also think when people realize something is functional and it improves their lives, that's when they tend to get on board, whether it conflicts with their religious ideology or not. Because oftentimes the religious ideology can be bendable. You can, because we're not talking about concepts that the Bible clearly spelled out, said this is right, or, brain implants is wrong. What we're talking about is, are brain implants helping you to be closer to your family, to the ones you love, to be more productive, so you might make more money to put your kid through school, or give your child leukemia treatment, these kinds of things? If the answer is yes, then technology is generally seen as a positive thing. And I think, in my opinion, technology is neutral. So it's really what we make of it. And I think the evangelical base, as well as any base of people around the world, will come around to say, well, it's improved our lives. It doesn't mean it's not without problems, but as a broad rule. It's improved our lives, and therefore it's worthwhile.
You know, that's so funny because we are already, you know, to a certain degree connected to that hive mind, you know, with our cell phones. We use them constantly. I mean, how many times a day do you check your cell phone? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And now that we're all stuck inside, we're checking it a whole lot more. So, and that brings us to the big topic that is on everybody's mind is this coronavirus outbreak. Where do you stand on all of that? And where do you think that maybe the government could have done better?
So, you know, I have a little bit of a controversial take that I'm willing to say publicly now. I was kind of waiting, but look, first off, you know, if I was to get into the presidency when I was running, I would on day one really expand the amount of funding that's going into, you know, fighting off diseases like Ebola, SARS, MERS, coronavirus. I mean, I would definitely support a universal vaccine for the flu. In fact, I think we're one day going to come up with a universal vaccine to cancer, and as well as heart disease and these kinds of things. So, you know, that's what transhumanism's main goal is, to overcome death with science and technology. So as a candidate, I would always put my money into those things. I consider the healthcare of the American people priority number one over anything else. So, you know, that's just what I would have done. But honestly, right now, we're in a very difficult position because we're not sure if what the precautionary things we're taking about by shutting down the economy is actually going to work. And if it does, how much damage are we causing to those that are in poverty or near poverty? Because now we've lost jobs. Now the, you know, stock market has lost a whole bunch of amount. Now there's like the economy has sank, you know, so now we have 10 million kids hungry every night as it is. Are we now going to have 20 or 30 million because we shut down the economy? How many people will die because America goes into a recession and maybe even a depression? Would it have been better to say, okay, this is terrible, we're in a terrible situation, but unfortunately, we're not going to shut down the economy because the old people, most of them that are dying, they only have a year to 3 years left to live, and they have underlying conditions anyways. We may look back and say, yes, 10,000 or 50,000 of them may have passed away, but there's actually going to be a lot of Americans that potentially pass away or have their lives destroyed, and probably millions, because of this possible depression. Again, I'm not advocating for doing anything different, but I do question this idea of a shutdown working, especially if the coronavirus comes back before we're able to get a vaccine in place. It's just a very tough call. I probably would have made the call not to close down cities, not to stop the economy, not to do anything, but the best way possible to isolate older people and let the younger people just get it and run with it, because a vast majority of people under 50 are barely even feeling effects.
So you're saying, you know, basically just develop a herd immunity to it. And yes, it's gonna be horrible, the people that pass away. But you're saying that would probably be better in the long run as opposed to locking everything down and completely stopping everything.
Well, the facts are pretty clear. When we go into a recession and we go into even a depression potentially, around the world, tens of millions of people will die anyways just by America going through that. And that's because America gives so much money to everyone. And when we pull back that money for ourselves, people die because they live in poverty or whatever else. So that already happens. Now, we also have the American people to worry about, because if we get into something like a Great Depression, all of a sudden we're going to have people without jobs. Maybe there'll be an increase of divorces. There'll be definitely more hunger on the streets. Also, as we're fighting coronavirus, there's a large amount of resources being dedicated to fighting coronavirus instead of going to fighting cancer or Alzheimer's or diabetes, other things that kill us way more per numbers. I mean, cancer is a much larger killer than coronavirus at the moment when you look at it. I mean, the statistic they're throwing around right now is that I think 3 or 4 million Chinese people have, or maybe 5 million Chinese people have died. I'm sorry, 3 or 4 or 5,000 Chinese people have passed away from coronavirus. But in that time, about 4 million Chinese people have died in total. So what's the real killer? Well, the real killer is other diseases, aging, the flu, other things like that. I'm worried that we're dedicating and losing a massive amount of economic resources that we could be using towards tackling the problems of aging and things like that that are killing millions. Instead, we're now doing all these other things to worry about just a few thousand. And, again, I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, and I know this is very controversial, but sometimes when bad stuff happens, you have to make the hard decisions. And right now, I can tell you that, Trump's priority is to be elected. So the last thing that he wants is CNN showing old people in the middle of, in the aisles of hospitals dying, because that's going to keep him from being elected. But the reality is, if you really care about the American people, there's 330 million of us. And if 10 or 20, 50,000 senior citizens pass away, unfortunately, it might be better than 50 million kids going hungry and 50 million people losing their jobs, bankruptcies, and all the other things.
I call this the Broke Folk Vote podcast because I feel like we represent the average everyday American. And you are so right. Before we had this YouTube channel, both my wife and I were servers at the Olive Garden restaurant, and we made $2.13 an hour. And now every restaurant in North Carolina has closed down, and nobody's able to work. And I mean, it's incredible. The broke folk, we can't afford to miss those paychecks. We can't afford to miss the time at work, because unfortunately every dollar that we have is dedicated to going to pay the bills. Andrew Yang ran on the platform of universal basic income. And one good thing that has come out of this lockdown is now it's pushing the narrative for universal basic income, because I think that is something that has to happen here in America. What are your thoughts on the universal basic income?
Well, I've been a longtime supporter since 2015 of the universal basic income. I just think it's critical, given the fact that automation robots are going to be taking our jobs. I mean, I campaigned on it in 2016 as the Transhumanist Party presidential candidate, and unfortunately, we needed something like the coronavirus to really point out how what a necessity it is to actually have to have a universal basic income. But I want to point out too that right now we're in a dire straits. The country, the world, it could get worse. The black swans tend to come in pairs or even triplets and whatnot. So it only takes one other thing, like a giant earthquake for California, a tsunami, maybe a meteorite. It could be just a cyber attack where the internet goes down all around the world, or something like that, to push us to that next level where then poverty is guaranteed, not just for 30% of Americans, but 70 or 80%. And even then, I'm not even sure universal basic income will actually get us fully out. It'll help us make these bridges. And of course, I totally support it. But wow, I mean, we're at a very close call. The problem about being on the edge is it doesn't take very much to push you all the way down. So we need more than just a basic income right now. We need not only a universal basic income, but a government that takes existential risk very, very, very serious. I mean, I hate to be the conspiracy theorist, but the dinosaurs died off for a reason. I mean, there's been plenty of plagues and plenty of instances of catastrophe for the human race. We are due for one. And it's time that governments take the job being a politician far more seriously than just being elected, but taking care, priority number one, of the healthcare of their citizens and also their prosperity, but also about worrying about larger things like existential risk, the kinds of risk where maybe millions and millions of us lose our lives and certainly lose whatever we've worked for. So I'm quite disappointed overall in government, and I always have been, at least the last 10 years since I've been involved in it. But we need more than universal basic income to straighten things out. But that would be a very, very good start. And I'm glad that it's finally getting the attention it deserves.
And that's something, I saw Andrew Yang tweeted out today that the White House, or his team, had been in touch with the White House. And I think that shows just how far, his campaign and your campaign and other people who are running on a universal basic income platform, how much it's moved the meter in this country. Because, a year ago, I consider myself pretty well informed. And a year ago, I had never even heard of universal basic income. It wasn't on anybody's radar. And now the conversation has opened up to a point where it's like you said, we're at this critical moment, not just in our country, but all over the world, really. And we're at this tipping point where the broke folk are just getting more and more and more. And you're seeing record numbers of people who are becoming homeless. And it's not for any reason of their own. It's not for any fault. It's just their car broke down and they couldn't get back and forth to work. And now you've got kids who are going hungry and they're on the streets. Oh my gosh, if you have ever been to Portland, the sight of the homeless people laying in the median, it just breaks your heart, man. It breaks your heart. And, we have to do something. We have to change the way that we think about ourselves as human beings, first of all. We have to stop acting like the homeless people that are out in the middle of the median aren't us, because they are us. They're just as valuable as we are.
I think a lot of it begins with the conversation that it's not that capitalism failed us. It's that in the last 10 years, due to widespread automation, capitalism, the nature of it has changed. It's not this dog-eat-dog world and some people get higher and other people are kind of in the middle left. That's not what's happened. What's happened is there's a tiny, tiny 1%, and then there's sort of the rest of us, and the inequality continues to grow. And at some point, you have to back off and say, wait a sec, capitalism is no longer taking care of the broad majority of people as it used to for literally centuries. And I think we need to take a step back. It doesn't mean we have to move towards socialism, because I don't want to. And it doesn't mean we have to move towards kind of communism. I don't want to do that either. It just means that there might be something kind of more in line with the Star Trek era, universal basic income. Everybody has some things covered. And once that's covered, then you can have kind of all the people that want to compete against each other. But at least we have a basis where there are no homeless and everybody can get the vaccinations that they need. Everybody has access to the school system and stuff like that. That could be the system that we get to. Unfortunately, I got to say, China is doing a very good job of it. China might have started as a socialist nation, but right now they have a pretty good idea of a kind of almost a socialist spread with capitalism at the top that's making that country grow dramatically faster than America. And okay, I understand coronavirus has happened, but they'll probably get back on it. And we may need to take on to a system that says no more are we leaving anyone behind for just so the rich can make more money. But we're going to say everyone gets taken to a basic, a basic kind of degree, and then let the rich compete for whatever, prize and possessions they want at the very top. That might be the best way, but it's not capitalism anymore. That's a very different something. I'm not really sure what the word is for it. I don't even know if we've entered that economic system, but I know that capitalism in the last 15, 20 years is clearly starting to fail us. And a lot of economists are saying the same thing. I mean, it's pretty widespread.
Yeah, it's amazing because, capitalism back in the day meant, you worked for a company, you put into it, at the end of the year, you got to retire, you got paid good benefits. You got all these things because people were vying for those good workers, and they wanted to take care of their workers. And then as things have progressed, you've seen where now automation is just ravaging any kind of manufacturing and any kind of shipping, and now it's hitting the roads and automatic trucks. And you have companies at the top, like Jeff Bezos and Amazon. And this is something that I wanted to ask you about, and I know we're on limited time, but your universal basic income plan called for a use of federal lands and leasing them out to companies. And, on the one hand, I think, yes, that would be a good idea. And then on the other hand, I think to myself, well, these companies have never respected us or respected the land anyway. They're just going to ravage it and rape it, and, then that land's going to be gone. How is your plan? How does it compare to like Andrew Yang's plan, where he says, okay, well, let's tax those companies like Jeff Bezos and Amazon with a value-added tax, and then we can take that and spread it out to all the people.
Well, I think you have to, your listeners and yourself to just know, first, I was running as a Republican. So for me to just go out there and say, we're going to raise taxes to pay for a UBI would never work with the Republican
Never. No, you're right.
So I had to come up with a strategy. Where big business could make money and the Democrats could say, well, at least we're being paid to take care of poverty. And that way it's a bipartisan plan. And that's really where, I love Mr. Yang's plan, but it's really a Democrat plan. And a lot of the Republicans aren't going to want to do that because it's a brand new tax. Whereas my plan doesn't raise taxes. The problem with my plan, though, is that it does have a cost to the environment. So we have to decide how much we want to use and perhaps even destroy our environment in order to alleviate poverty. But the only difference with I really think my plan has a better chance of passing in Congress than Andrew Yang's because it really combines both parties getting something that they want. But as I've been saying, on Twitter, is that maybe it's a combination of my plan with Mr. Yang's. And frankly, there's other plans out there too. There's even cryptocurrency plans and whatnot. Maybe it's a combination of a number of plans all together that actually would get past Congress so that we could fund the universal basic income. And then everybody in Congress, whatever party you're at, whatever state, gets a little piece of the pie. Because again, you have to realize something like this has to, okay, Mr. Trump might be able to send out checks right now for the next few months, but in order to get a universal basic income really passed, it's going to have to go through Congress. So we're going to have to get both the left and the right on it. And that's where my plan comes in. It tries to bridge the left and the right by giving something to everybody.
I very much appreciate you clarifying that because, I wondered about it. And as you explained it, it makes sense, it's got to be bipartisan. And because you were running on the Republican ticket and me coming from the conservative side of things, I can totally understand that. Republicans I don't want any more taxes, for sure. I know that you're on limited time and I want to let you get off of here, but I want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and taking a little bit of time. And I really, truly hope that we can do this again in a very short order because I find your platform and the things that you believe, and I find it very, very fascinating. And I would love to just dig into it further if you have the time.
Well, let me just answer one more thing about your last question about the environment. Excuse me, because I'm coughing. I was just playing out with my kids because I can't go anywhere. I'm kind of in home lockdown like everybody. So I was out doing Frisbee. But we hope as transhumanists in the next 20 to 30 years to be able to be coming up with a lot of crazy ideas like nanotechnology, where you could take something like plastic and basically form it through nanotechnology into something that is environmentally friendly. We're also hoping through genetic editing to be able to regrow, and genetic editing is of course one of the great transhumanist kind of discoveries in the last decade, to regrow trees 10 times faster than they grow. So the fact that we deplete the Amazon might be not such an issue if we can regrow the Amazon in 1 or 2 years' time. And we've already had success with growing tomatoes, for example, twice as fast. So my federal land dividend, this basic income, I do worry about the environmental destruction, but I also believe in human ingenuity. And I think we're going to be able to come up with different ways to reverse the scarring of the land through different types of technologies like nanotechnology. And geoengineering, of course, is the big one. Geoengineering is where you take radical technologies and you try to change weather systems. And of course, there's multiple universities working on this where they can actually like seed clouds to rain, and you might be able to change global warming and things like that. So I'm hopeful in the next 20 to 30 years, we will be able to start remaking our planet into kind of the Eden that it can be, even if we've used its resources. The good news, though, is in the meantime, we would hopefully solve the poverty issue, and then we'd have the technology to make our planet beautiful again. Anyways, that's a lot of optimism, but that's my environmental take. It's not like I just want to destroy the land and send money off to people. We have a plan to try to fix the earth once we've salvaged the resources from it as well. It takes you a bridge of jumping in thought.
It does, and as you said, that's a very optimistic view. I think the rub with people comes in is, for so long we've been lied to, by our government. We've been told that things are going to be better, and there's been this constant kicking of the can down the road. And I think that we've lost our faith in our government to actually do what you're saying, because we see, the weather, you're talking about seeding weather patterns and all this, they're also using it for warfare. there's warfare on, everything that it seems like that we get that should be shaping our lives for the Star Trek future that we want, sends us more and more down the Mad Max road.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. It is hard to trust the government. And hopefully, people like myself, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, we're going to try to bring in a new generation of people that are more trustworthy if we can ever get elected into office and make real change. But I agree with you. I don't trust the government much right now either.
Listen, I very much appreciate your time, Zoltan. Let's do it again very, very soon, brother.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree. And thanks so much for having me. Sorry about the short time frame, but it's been great to talk with you.
Great to talk to you too, brother.